Broadcasting from the Gaylord Rockies Resort in Denver, Colorado, Solutions Review is on location at Commvault GO 2019. Brought to you by Commvault.
It's Doug Atkinson back here on the floor of the Commvault GO Village Expo. It's where everybody's gathered. And we are joined by Nigel Tozer, who is the Solutions Marketing Director for the EMEA. And I'm glad you're here because you're going to be able to give us a good perspective on compliance. And that's a huge topic around these parts, not only because it's all about, not only what data you have and what data you need to forget about, potentially, but where it is. Because, certainly from EMEA, there's all kinds of compliance issues with regard to GDPR.
Yeah, there is.
And one of the messages that we've been hearing is that the Commvault solution is particularly good. I think the Activate piece of the Commvault solution is particularly good at identifying data and where it's going and where it resides, and also remembers when you've deleted what you've needed to delete based upon being compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think. Oh, actually, Doug, I would take it a little stage further than that.
Yeah.
Rather than compliance. Compliance is specific to a particular regulation.
Sure.
But there's a bunch of regulations that apply to your industry, potentially, your geography. And even though GDPR gets a lot of the headlines,
right,
there's a ton of regulations around the world. And then you have to think about security and how you manage and retain data. And really, that whole thing all intermingles into what we call information governance. And information governance is a pretty scary big thing to look at. But the amount of data we have and the abilities that companies and businesses have now to collect data about people, monetize it from those wonderful magical devices we all put in our pockets. There's a lot that you can do wrong with it. Technology has a great potential to amplify the problems that you can have with this legislation.
Yeah, and honestly, the amount of data that is coming into these organizations, enterprises, is beginning to overwhelm because it is so much. And the mindset is to capture as much as you can.
Yeah, it is, and and that leads to problems down the line. Number one, we collect so much data through so many applications and systems now. We don't just do it on premises, we do it in the cloud. Oh no, the cloud. We do it in multiple clouds, SaaS applications, and it's really difficult to track data and where it is. So you need something that's going to allow you to get visibility of what you've got. And it's only when you can have that visibility that you can start to assess what your risks are from a security perspective. Because things like GDPR and all the other regulations around the world, the number one thing that they go for in a lot of cases, and the big fines come in, are for data breaches. And if you don't understand what data you hold, where it is, and how secure it is, that's the kind of problem that you're building up for the future. And if you don't protect things properly, then you just look at the amount of news stories where there's been data breaches because somebody put something in an unsecured bucket in the cloud. It's kind of scary.
Well, so I wanted to touch on that because you're talking to a lot of customers. You hear, the goods and the bads, the whole range of preparation. Where are people? What's your assessment of where folks are with regard to data governance and compliance ultimately?
Well, there's a lot of companies done a lot of hard work, particularly in Europe for GDPR.
Yep.
It's been treated like something completely revolutionary.
Yep.
But it's not. In the UK, where I'm from, it's maybe 10% more stringent than the old regulation in terms of what you have to do.
Yep.
The difference is the old regulations didn't have big ticket fines associated with them, so the incentive the incentive to comply was not so strong, right? And the fines, 4% of though that's not something I want to quote, but 4% of revenue of the parent company, that can really get people's attention. So there's a lot of hard work gone on, but there's still a whole spectrum of compliance with those regulations, from the ones that have worked really hard to do it, the ones that take a view what can we get away with, and let's just focus on,
Right.
And then
doesn't really apply to us.
And then the ones like, yeah, what are the chances of us getting caught? So you do get that whole spectrum. But when you start to look at GDPR and then you kind of take a global view, there's regulations in Australia, Japan, South Africa, Israel, South America. You've got Brazil and Mexico who've enacted very similar legislation to GDPR. The CCPA, the California
no
Consumer
doubt about
Privacy
it.
Act.
I mean, that's it's our estimation that's probably about 20% of the data in the United States is coming out of California.
And as soon as one big state like California, what is it, the third or fifth largest economy on its own in the world?
Yeah.
Right. So when some state does that, it almost becomes the common denominator for the rest of the US, whether you like it or not. And I know there's a lot of talk about a privacy regulation, a federal privacy regulation, which we're all watching from our side of the pond with great interest. And I think it even made the Democratic candidate debate last night. Data,
right.
yeah. So it's something we have to think about.
Well, so with regard to that, and a question that we're asking everybody who's coming up and joining us is, what advice you would offer to folks, and we can make it around governance.
Well, so there's a few things that are really just good common sense that people forget. So the first thing is, a lot of big companies especially have compliance officers, that look after this kind of stuff, and organizations typically think about all their program services and build them, and then they go to the compliance person, and that person goes, no, you can't do that. And then they become the no department. But if you involve those people at the very beginning, they can give you some real good advice that actually becomes constructive, and then things don't creep under the wire and you don't get those kind of problems. And actually that department then stops being the no department and becomes an enabler. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say really is understand your data. As you mentioned, the Activate booth that we have over there covers the technologies that helps organizations to map their data out. And it actually looks at the content from applications through all of the unstructured data. It works in the cloud and even with SaaS applications. And it allows you to profile what your risk is. It doesn't, you can search for individual items, but it also allows you to look for entities, types of things. So you can find that sensitive data, you can then find out how well protected it is, mediate it, those kind of things, and also serve for things like the right to erasure requests that can be really difficult.
Well, and I think that's actually might be the best advice that people can take away these days, is not just protect your data or back up your data, but understand your data so that you understand what you need to do with it in order to stay out of any trouble.
The third piece of advice I would give is you can't have a data breach or have to forget data that you don't have in the first place, right? So every business that I go to, they're data hoarders. You pointed out earlier on, Doug, they want as much data as they can get, without really thinking about whether it's a value. And data, it can spike in value, it can trough in value. Risk is constant, especially if it's personal data. So you need to understand, clean out the rubbish that you really don't need, that is just an anchor of risk, and then you can start to move forward. And there are other technologies too, and I'm very passionate about pointing out to people that things like data governance, it's not a technology issue. Sure, technology is part of the solution because technology is part of the problem and you need one to balance the other out. But it's a people thing, you have to educate people, and it's a process thing. You have to get the processes right in your organization to deal with that. And no one vendor, no one company can just drop a solution on you to give you governance. It's something you have to think about and plan for.
Excellent. Well, thanks for swinging by.
Hey, thank you, Doug.
That was always that was very much insightful, and we appreciate the time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the show. I know we're enjoying being right in the middle of all this, and thanks for having us over.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
All right.